To bring into the conversation as well, Michelle Goodwin, Chancellor's Professor at the University of California, Irvine. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Professor Goodwin. Your response to this leaked decision of the Supreme Court?
First of all, thank you so much for having me back on the show. This is unprecedented that there would be a leaked document coming from the United States Supreme Court. But let's be clear that these are incredibly unprecedented times that we find ourselves in the United States, with an insurrection to overturn the results of an election last year, and now with the Supreme Court seeking to potentially gut Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. This is a first draft of an unpublished opinion, so we don't actually know what will happen, but very likely, given this draft, we will see the undoing of Roe v. Wade. And it's important that we understand that with the undoing of Roe v. Wade, just what's at stake in the United States for our democracy and the rule of law. And if we look at this within the context of our democracy and the rule of law, you see the potential for the Supreme Court to do a bit of cherry picking around equality issues, around privacy issues, about matters that relate to autonomy with people's bodies. You also see the Supreme Court seeking to skirt empirical data that has emerged in years since Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. What is crystallized is that the World Health Organization has said that an abortion is as safe as a penicillin shot. An abortion, surgical abortion, one of the safest medical procedures that a person could have. But even more than that, when we look at rates of maternal morbidity and mortality in the United States, then this opinion is absolutely shocking. As shocking as and horrific as we see the state level anti-abortion laws. A woman is 14 times more likely to die in the United States by carrying a pregnancy to term than by terminating it. And so if we fail to include that in our conversation, then we're missing what essentially is a death sentence for many women across the United States and girls. And let me add one layer to that. For Black women, they're 3.5 times more likely to die due to maternal mortality in the United States than their white counterparts. That is a national figure. That actually doesn't tell us all that we need to know when we actually look at states like Mississippi, Texas, Alabama, Louisiana, where Black women may be 5 times, 10 times, even 17 times more likely to die in certain cities and counties in those states than their white counterparts. And so this is not just a political performance or kind of partisanship way beyond ideology that we see coming from the Supreme Court. What we see is something that is very graphic in terms of what it will illustrate in terms of maternal morbidity and mortality. And let me add one last piece to that as well, is that this is not something that is conjecturing. This is actually coming from data from the CDC and from the state's departments of health and human services in those states. This is already what is taking shape given the anti-abortion measures that have taken place in the last 10 years in those states. It's glaring, it's alarming, and this draft opinion shows just how egregious it is.
Professor Goodwin, I want to ask you two questions. One is, this is so unprecedented. I mean, in the court's history, has there ever been a release of a draft? And this is such a significant decision, but it has not come out. Is it conceivable, given what has happened, that one of these justices might change their mind? That's number one. And number two is, this is the judiciary. I'm looking at a tweet of Nina Turner, who is running for Congress in Ohio today. The election is taking place. She says, protecting abortion rights is not a midterm pitch. Democrats have the power now. We have the majority in Congress and we have the White House. Instead of drafting fundraising emails tonight, our elected leaders should be in D.C. voting to codify Roe and getting rid of the filibuster. So making Roe v. Wade the law of the land legislatively, if you could answer both.
Yeah, so let me start with the second part, which is that making Roe the law of the land, the Women's Health Protection Act is the legislation that has been promulgated in Congress. It's gotten through the House, but it's not been able to make its way through the United States Senate. It would codify Roe, and I should just say that for those who really care about not just reproductive rights, but reproductive justice, Roe doesn't actually go far enough, but this would be incredibly important, the passage of the Women's Health Protection Act. It is sound legislation. It is important that that legislation is enacted. Absolutely. But to your first question, which is whether there might be a justice that could potentially change his or her mind, there is the potential for that to happen after first drafts of opinions. There are times in which there are justices that are moved to the other side of the vote. Will that happen with these particular justices? You know, Amy, I think it's important that we add to the conversation here that Justice Alito authored another important decision that was extraordinary, and it was the Hobby Lobby case. And in that case, Justice Alito also did a similar dance, which is to say that it's only about this particular decision. We can't look at it beyond. And what that was striking down part of the Affordable Care Act, essentially saying that organizations, for-profit companies, could have religious identities, and that those religious identities would allow them to reject part of federal law, which is to make available through their insurance programs contraception. There were a series of companies that said that we find ourselves to be religious, which was something that the Supreme Court had never upheld before. And that secondly, we conflate contraception with abortion, and therefore sought that the Supreme Court would essentially agree to the same. And the Supreme Court did in an opinion that was written by Justice Alito. And Justice Alito said, well, this only applies to companies that have these kinds of religious views. It doesn't expand beyond this. So a company can't say we have religious views and we oppose, let's say, blood transfusion, and therefore deny people who work for us from getting blood transfusions. So a justice could change their mind, and it is possible that the Women's Health Protection Act could be enacted, but neither of those things are happening today.
I'd like to go back to Kitty Colbert to ask you. You wrote a